big fight announcements, multiple of them as well. Alex Pereira is going to be defending his belt against Israel Adesanya on April 8th for UFC 287. They're of course headlining the card, and that means we're not going to get that Jamal Hill fight, at least yet. I know it's a big storyline that people want to see, the student avenge his master, but he needs to take out the one-time dominant champion Adesanya for the 4th time they're competing against each other. Are things going to change? I mean, they fought each other 3 times already in different sports, many years along the road, and Pereira has always seemed to be the better fighter. Not only that though, we have Gilbert Burns coming back quickly, and he's going to be fighting Jorge Masvidal. This is the guy that he's been calling out, and before said that Jorge was turning him down. They're going to be co-headlining the card. I really don't know which fight is going to be bigger for the pay-per-view. Jorge might be the biggest star on the card, but he's not the main event, which tells me that this card is going to do very well. How much are people going to be interested in a 4th fight between Pereira and Adesanya, 2nd time in MMA? I don't think they're going to be as interested as they were in the first fight. But putting on Jorge versus Burns, especially the fact that Burns did very well against Hamzat, and a lot of people watched that fight, tells me that this card might be one of the biggest cards of the year. Not only that, we also have Kevin Holland going to be fighting Santiago Ponzinibbio, so Holland's going to keep fighting. He's going up against another veteran. He just lost against Wonderboy, now against Ponzinibbio. We're going to see if things change for him. I think this fight is way more competitive for him, and it should be a bit of a banger. Ponzinibbio is going to be bringing all the heat at Holland. We also have the young Raul Rosas Jr. going to be fighting Christian Rodriguez, and yes, this guy is better than the last guy Rosas Jr. fought. And we also have Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. That fight is insane. Font versus Yanez has everything you want in a good fight. We also have Kelvin Gastelum versus Chris Curtis, another banger candidate. But speaking about the main event first, I don't know what else Adesanya is really going to change here. I mean, he's tried everything. He tried to grapple this time, where he couldn't beat Pereira in the striking before. He tried his hand at just mixing up the game against him, and that didn't work as well. He seems to always be able to hurt Pereira early in the fight, and it's always with his right straight. But you're going to have to think that Pereira's going to be ready for something like that, right? And also we know Pereira's a bigger, stronger guy, and he's going to be able to take Adesanya to the ground again, and I think his wrestling is going to progress even more than Adesanya's going into this 4th fight, for the fact that he is training with Glover Teixeira. And Glover now is going to be spending all of his time on preparing Pereira. He's going to be focusing everything he has and making sure that Pereira defends his belt. I think the fight is still going to be competitive. I think it's still going to be somewhat close. These two are the best strikers we've ever seen in the UFC. There's still debate with Anderson Silva in his prime and stuff, but these two guys are so skilled on the feet, it's never going to be a dominant win for one or the other. But I don't think much changes in this one. I think Pereira's going to be able to do what he did last time, maybe not get hurt in the beginning, maybe watch out for that right straight, which seems to be Adesanya's like lone punch he's hitting him with, and he's doing it off that delayed jab where he's kind of like blinding him with his fist in his face. But I think the leg kicks, as we've seen before, are going to cause more damage. Pereira does a very good job of checking Adesanya's kicks, as well as landing really good ones on him as well. And the issue with defending Pereira's leg kicks is the fact that if you're going to focus on defending those too much, there's always a left hook that could come out right afterward. As I just talked about with Alex Pereira's left hook, he always finds a way to torque, rotate, before throwing it. And that leg kick is a natural rotation for Pereira to swing out that left hook. And Adesanya seems to have a very hard time of keeping Pereira off of him. Very tough time of not getting pressure back. And before he tried to clinch up in order to stop that kind of pressure, but that ultimately cost him in their last fight. So you're going to have to think that Adesanya is probably going to want to throw more output, especially with his jab and right cross, just to get Pereira off of him a bit. Their output is very similar. They're almost even with the amount of strikes that they throw out there. And that's only going to favor the bigger and more powerful fighter in Pereira. Whenever he throws punches and kicks, Adesanya is always backing up. Whereas when Adesanya is throwing attacks at Pereira, Pereira's not really backing up that much. He just moves a little bit to get out of the way, but then re-engages on top of him again. And Adesanya has to respect his power. So maybe adding on to his punch count is going to help Adesanya on just creating enough distance to see what he has to do here, to see what he has to do in these sequences. Because sometimes it gets a bit too close, and he gets a bit too cautious of the left hook and right straight from Pereira. But ultimately, yeah, I do think Alex Pereira should win this fight yet again. I think a wrestling factor can also be implemented from Pereira's side, given his size advantage. Both guys are not good grapplers, good wrestlers, as we saw in the last fight. And we do know that Pereira actually got the lone forceful takedown in that entire fight, and it's mainly because of his size. And I think Pereira is only going to get even better because he is somewhat new to MMA. He's still learning, whereas Adesanya's been doing this for a pretty long time already. So I do think that Pereira is going to win, and I think it's going to be more convincing. And speaking of Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal, I don't think it's as one-sided as people expected it to be. It seems like a lot of people believe that Burns is going to run right through Jorge, but given the fact that Burns doesn't have a great chin, he does leave himself open sometimes to get punched, especially with a jab and right cross, and Jorge could be very tricky. He's fast with his hands. He can be a hard guy to take to the ground if you're not Usman or Colby. Gilbert can absolutely run into some issues here, but Jorge has been inactive for some time. It'll be over a year since he competed against Colby Covington. I think Burns is the more capable fighter here, but the fact that he can get chin checked at any moment by the speed of Jorge's punches, that fight can end very quickly even if Burns is winning. It's probably going to be a 3-round fight, but I would love to see it for 5 rounds. I think in a 5-rounder, it could make things a lot more interesting, right? Because if Gilbert Burns starts holding Jorge up against the fence and try to take him down and, use his jiu-jitsu and stuff like that, we've seen Jorge deal somewhat well against Demian Maia, as well as one guy could. The fight could be pretty stalled out if Burns is not striking with him too much. And we know that Jorge can sometimes get into like a defensive shell, especially when there's too much pressure on him. That is something I don't want to see too much. In a 5-round fight, I think it changes that. There's always an opportunity for Jorge in a 5-round fight to catch Burns, but in a 3-round fight, I think it definitely favors Gilbert Burns. So I do think Burns should win this. He could be somewhat wild with his hands, and maybe some of those can tag Jorge if Burns is actually faking takedowns first. If Burns establishes a takedown threat first, I think he can start catching Jorge with his hands. Very similar to the way that Kamaru Usman was able to. If he just straight up kickboxes with Jorge, things can turn very rough for Gilbert Burns. So it's going to come down to, what does Burns do? We know how Jorge is going to fight. He's going to fight just like he fights everybody else. But Burns is going to have to make some intelligent decisions in that fight of when he wants to shoot, how he fakes takedowns, and how he sets up his punches after that. If he's able to take Jorge down and submit him, he did something that even Demian Maia couldn't do, which is crazy. Kevin Holland and Santiago Ponzinibbio seems to be a banger of the night for sure. Someone's getting knocked out. Both these guys have tremendous power. We know Ponzinibbio is all game, all down for a war at all times. And Kevin Holland can be as well. And Kevin Holland, I believe, has more power. He can hit anybody in the world and hurt them. But the problem that worries me about him is whenever he misses a punch, he is so open to be hit. He completely loses his footing when he misses a punch. And you do not want to be in that sort of state when you're up against Ponzi. Because when this guy cracks you, it's not just one power punch coming at you, it's like 5 until you fall. And you can get overwhelmed before you even know it. Ponzinibbio also has devastating leg kicks, which is going to be extremely effective against Kevin Holland. But the thing about Ponzinibbio is something that worries me all the time about him, and that is he is older. We missed out his prime years. We never got to see him at his absolute best. But I believe even at his age, he could put up a compelling fight. Rosas Jr. is going to have his work cut out for him. Christian Rodriguez is a big step up. He's good on the ground. He's good on the feet. He actually has fights in the UFC already. He's 8-1. Completely different kind of fighter for Rosas Jr. to fight, so this is going to be a very big test, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. Rob Font, Adrian Yanez. It really seems like this is Rob Font's exit out the door. I think Adrian Yanez might be the fighter that takes the torch from Rob Font. Font is an older guy, man. He's been fighting for a while. He made his way up in the rankings all the way up to the top 5, and that was pretty much it for him. It would be interesting to see if he can actually beat Yanez, but considering that his chin is failing him now, his rather fundamental boxing style is really getting figured out by these guys that have variety to their striking. You especially saw that on display when he fought Chito, and Chito doesn't even have high output. Adrian Yanez is a different story and could even be a harder fight for Rob Font than Chito was. I think Yanez is there to be hit, which is a bit of a difference there. I don't think Yanez has the same kind of defense that Chito does, but in terms of offense, I wouldn't be surprised if Yanez does more work on Rob Font than some of the other guys that beat Font did. Yanez reminds me kind of like almost like a Dustin Poirier when he has you hurt. He's one of the scariest guys to be hurt in front of. He does not stop throwing at your head, throwing at your body, beats you up and breaks you before you fall. And that is why I say that it could be a big difference than what Chito did to Font, because Chito's kind of a guy who just snipes you, hits you once, stalks you, looks for the next big shot. If Yanez cracks Rob Font, there's going to be a hailstorm of punches coming at him. And I wouldn't be surprised if Yanez becomes the first guy to finish Rob Font with strikes. Aldo and Chito couldn't do it, but they have a different kind of style. Yanez is a guy that wants to put you away whenever he has you hurt, and he's very intelligent inside those exchanges as well. So the card looks like it's going to be excellent. I'm super hyped up for this. The fights that they announced here are all definitely worth watching, and I cannot wait, man.